Today we are diving into one of the most misunderstood figures in all of Western thought, Augustine of Hippo. You can kind of think of him as this crucial bridge, a thinker standing right at the crossroads between the ancient philosophy of Plato and the medieval world of Aquinas. His influence is just massive, but the picture most of us have of him, it's often just wrong.
So let's just start by facing the caricature of Augustine head-on. Look, if you've heard anything about him, it's probably one of these three big charges, right? That he was a dualist who hated the physical world, a moralist completely obsessed with guilt, or a political strongman who was totally fine with religious coercion.
But what if that's not the whole story? What if these common beliefs, while maybe rooted in a tiny grain of truth, totally miss the bigger picture? We're going to unpack each one of these charges by exploring the three major phases of his life that actually sparked them.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning with his youth. This is where the whole idea of Augustine as this anti-world dualist, someone who supposedly hated the human body and the physical world, is where it all really gets started.
So, you've got this guy, Augustine, and he is seriously ambitious. Super smart. He climbed the social ladder all the way from a small town in North Africa to Milan, the very heart of the Roman Empire. And he did it all through his mastery of public speaking. But his journey wasn't just about his career, it was an intellectual one too. He was exploring all kinds of philosophies, but one in particular, Manichaeism, is going to be a huge deal for him and for his reputation later on.
So what is this idea? At its core, both Manichaeism and another philosophy he was into, Neoplatonism, had this concept of metaphysical dualism. To put it simply, it's the belief that all of reality is split into two warring halves, a pure, good, spiritual realm, and a corrupt, broken, material world that we experience with our senses. And for them, our world was definitely the bad one.
You've probably heard of Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Well, it's the perfect way to understand this. Imagine you're chained up in a cave your whole life, just watching shadows on the wall. You'd think those shadows were real, wouldn't you? Plato argued that our physical world is just like that, a flickering shadow play that's distracting us from a higher, more real, spiritual truth. You can totally see why a powerful idea like that would captivate a young, searching guy like Augustine.
Okay, but here's the absolute kicker, the part that the caricature always conveniently leaves out. Augustine didn't stay there. He eventually rejected both of these dualistic philosophies. And why? Because he came to believe they were flat out wrong about the material world. His conversion to Christianity led him to a really radical conclusion. The physical world, including the human body, wasn't evil. It was fundamentally good, a creation to be valued.
Okay, so that brings us to the next big chapter in his life, and the second major charge against him. After he converted, Augustine became a bishop and a community leader. And this is where we get that picture of him as this moralist, totally obsessed with guilt and human sin.
Now, if you really want to understand what he was teaching about morality, you can't just read his words. You have to look at how the guy actually lived. His vision for a religious life was completely revolutionary. I mean, forget that image of a lone monk hiding out in the desert to find God. Augustine dragged the whole monastery right into the middle of the noisy, messy, chaotic city. For him, the real test of faith wasn't in isolation. It was in the thick of community.
And believe me, this community was radical. They held everything in common because they were deeply suspicious of private property. And get this, they were brutally, squirm-inducingly honest with each other about their personal flaws. I mean, their logic was pretty simple. Why bother hiding your weaknesses from each other when God already knows all of them?
And yeah, as a preacher, he did not pull his punches. He was constantly hitting his congregation with the hardest parts of their faith, like you see in this quote. His goal was never to make people feel comfortable. It was to make them think, to make them question their deepest assumptions about, well, everything, from their families to their social duties.
And this is exactly where the big misunderstanding happens. This intense focus on human weakness and failure gets twisted into an obsession with guilt. But for Augustine, admitting you're flawed wasn't the end of the road. It was the starting line. It was the essential first step you had to take before you could even begin to build a totally different kind of community, one based on grace and honesty, not on pretending to be perfect.
All right, last stop, his legacy. And this is probably the most damaging charge of all, that Augustine was a political authoritarian. This is the idea that he used his power to crush his opponents, and in doing so, he set a dangerous precedent for centuries of religious coercion.
So Augustine becomes this major league bishop, and he gets thrown right into the middle of two massive controversies: The Donatist fight was tearing the church apart over a really painful question. Should leaders who caved under Roman persecution be forgiven? And then there was the Pelagian debate about human nature itself. Basically, can we be good all by ourselves, or do we need God's help? The positions Augustine took in these fights would literally define Western Christianity for 1,000 years.
And here's the thing, Augustine's side won these arguments, and because he sometimes used the power of the Roman state to seal the deal, he got painted as this heavy-handed enforcer. For his critics, this is Exhibit A. Augustine, the guy who used political muscle to crush dissent and force everyone into one rigid box.
But if you actually read what he wrote, it tells a completely different story. The man had a deeply anti-authoritarian streak. He told his followers again and again, "Don't follow me, follow reason. Don't follow me, follow the scriptures." I mean, the guy was apparently furious when he heard people were treating his books like they were the final word on anything. And that's the great tragic irony of it all, isn't it? He couldn't control what people did with his work after he was gone. Even with all his warnings, future generations did the exact thing he told them not to. They took his massive, complicated, always evolving body of thought, and they basically fossilized it into this rigid rulebook. He became the very kind of authority figure he argued against his entire life.
So, okay, we've peeled back all these layers of myth. We're looking at a much more complicated, more human Augustine. But so what? Why should we even care about some ancient thinker today?
Well, I think there are three really powerful reasons his work is still incredibly relevant. Reading Augustine helps us make sense of our past, it helps us navigate our future, and maybe most surprisingly of all, it helps us understand ourselves right here in the present.
First off, you just can't understand the history of Western thought without him. It's that simple. He's this incredible bridge connecting the ancient world of Plato to the medieval world of Aquinas. For literally 1,000 years after he died, almost all philosophy and theology was in some way a conversation with Augustine.
Second, and this might sound a little weird, he helps us navigate our future. Many of our most cherished secular values have deep roots in the world he helped shape. I mean, take the idea that every single person has infinite intrinsic value. We take that for granted, right? But that's not some obvious fact of nature. That idea was forged in the very theological debates he was leading. Our world is, as one historian put it, worldly in a Christian way, and Augustine is one of its key architects.
And finally, and this might be the most important one, he helps us understand our present. It's so easy to forget that before he was St. Augustine, he was just Augustine, a man trying to make a career, a partner, a father mourning the death of his son, a brilliant and skeptical academic. And here's the key. For years, he wasn't a believer. He knew what it was like to have doubts, to be a skeptic from the inside out.
And that leaves us with one last kinda unsettling question. Once you strip away the myths and see the real person, the ambitious professional, the grieving father, the restless intellectual, you have to wonder, is this ancient thinker from a totally different world actually a lot less different from you and me than we think?